The Last Voicemail. The Sunday Ritual. The fog was thick that Sunday morning in Monterey, the kind that rolls in off the Pacific like a slow-moving ghost and settles over everything until noon. Eleanor Whitmore could hear it more than see it, the low, steady horn from the lighthouse on Point Pinos, the muffled crash of waves against the rocks below her cliffside house, the occasional cry of a gull that sounded too lonely even for a bird. She was 78 now, and the years had settled into her bones the way damp salt air settles into wood, quietly, persistently, leaving everything a little heavier, a little grayer. Her hair, once the color of dark honey, was mostly silver, pulled back in a loose knot at the nape of her neck. She still wore the same cardigan most mornings, navy blue with elbow patches Daniel had sewn on himself back when his hands were steady and his laugh came easy. The sweater smelled faintly of cedar and Old Spice, even after all these years in the closet. She never washed it. Some things you don't wash away. The house was small, a single-story white clapboard with blue shutters, built in 1928 when people still believed in things like porches and ocean views that didn't cost a fortune. It sat on a narrow street called Ocean View Lane, though half the houses on the lane had lost their view to bigger, newer places built by tech money from Silicon Valley. Eleanor's cottage still had its slice of blue, straight out the living room window past the crooked cypress tree and the low stone wall Daniel had built in '79. She liked to say the ocean was her front yard. Most days she believed it. She moved through the kitchen with the careful slowness of someone who knew exactly how many steps it took to reach the coffee maker without bumping a hip on the counter. Arthritis had claimed her right knee years ago, and the left one was starting to complain. She didn't mind. It gave her something to talk back to. The coffee was Folgers, same can she'd been buying since the Nixon administration. Daniel used to tease her about it. "Elle, we can afford the fancy stuff now." But she'd always answered the same way. Fancy coffee doesn't taste like home. He'd smile, kiss the top of her head, and pour himself a second cup anyway. She measured 6 scoops into the filter, added water, hit the switch. While it gurgled and hissed, she took down 2 mugs from the cupboard. His was white with a faded green shamrock, St. Patrick's Day 1986, a gift from the sophomore history class. Hers plain blue. She filled both. His she left on the counter, half full, steam curling up like a question no one would answer. Hers she carried to the armchair by the bay window. The armchair was upholstered in faded green velvet, sagging in the middle from decades of use. Daniel had proposed to her in a chair very much like it, though that one had been in her parents' living room in Salinas. She'd said yes before he even finished the question. 54 years later, she still sat in roughly the same position, back straight, feet together, hands folded around the warm mug, waiting for something that wasn't coming. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and this is the story of the last voicemail my husband ever left me, and the letters he hid so I would find them after he was gone. She reached for the old silver flip phone on the side table. It was a relic even when Daniel bought it in 2008. He'd insisted on keeping it because it makes phone calls and that's all I need. She'd rolled her eyes then. Now she was grateful for its stubborn simplicity. No touch screen, no apps, just a little green screen and buttons that clicked under her thumb. She opened it, went to voicemails. There was only one saved. She pressed play. The room filled with his voice. "Hey, Elle, I'll be home soon. Save me some coffee." 8 seconds. That was all. She closed her eyes and played it again. "Hey, Elle, I'll be home soon. Save me some coffee." His voice was warm, a little rough around the edges from too many years of shouting over teenagers in the classroom and too many cigarettes in his 20s before he quit for her. He had a smile in it, the same one he wore when he came through the door after a long day, dropped his keys on the hall table, and called her name like it was the best word he knew. She played it a third time. Then she let the phone rest in her lap and stared out at the fog. The ocean was a gray smear today, indistinguishable from the sky. She sipped her coffee. It was already cooling. 5 years since the accident. 5 years, 2 months, and 17 days if you counted like she did. A foggy Tuesday in October, Highway 1 just past Carmel Highlands. Black ice, they said, though it wasn't really ice, just slick pavement and bad luck. Daniel's old Ford pickup had gone over the edge, rolled twice, landed against a stand of Monterey pines. The coroner called it instantaneous, a mercy, people told her at the funeral. She nodded and thanked them, because that's what you do. But Mercy didn't sit in the passenger seat beside her every night when she drove home from the grocery store. Mercy didn't leave the second mug on the counter every Sunday morning. Mercy didn't play the 8-second voicemail on repeat until the battery died. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of the cardigan. The tears came easier these days, less dramatic, more like a slow leak she couldn't quite patch. She didn't fight them anymore. Outside, a gull landed on the stone wall, cocked its head, then flew off into the white. She thought about Jack, their only child, 55 now, living in a high-rise in Chicago with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of a lake that wasn't the Pacific. He hadn't been home in 3 years. The last time they really spoke, was Christmas 2 years ago, over the phone because his flight got canceled and he said work was too busy to reschedule. She asked if he was happy. He said, "I'm fine, Mom." He heard the lie in it, the same lie she used when people asked how she was holding up. Pride, that was the word that kept coming back. His pride, her pride. Daniel used to say pride was like wet cement, easy to step in, hell to get out of once it hardened. She looked at the second mug on the counter. The coffee had gone cold. "Daniel," she whispered to the empty room, "what am I supposed to do with all this quiet?" No answer came, just the foghorn again, low and mournful, and the soft tick of the wall clock in the hallway. She set her own mug down, stood slowly, and walked to the kitchen. She poured the cold coffee from his mug down the sink, rinsed it, dried it with a dish towel embroidered with little anchors, another gift from one of his students years ago. Then she hung it back on his hook, exactly where it belonged. Sunday ritual complete. She didn't know it yet, but in a few hours she would open the junk drawer looking for a spare pair of reading glasses and find something else entirely, an old Nokia brick phone she hadn't seen since the week after the funeral, and everything would change. But that was still hours away. For now she simply stood at the sink, hands barest on the edge, listening to the ocean breathe, and the house breathed with her. Eleanor didn't plan to clean anything that Sunday afternoon. Cleaning, in her experience, was something you did when company was coming or when guilt finally outweighed inertia. Today there was neither, just the slow drip of post-ritual melancholy and the nagging sense that the house was watching her, waiting for her to do something other than sit and remember. She wandered into the kitchen around 2 o'clock, the fog still thick outside, turning the windows into gray mirrors. The second mug still sat on the drain board where she'd left it, empty now, but with a faint coffee ring she hadn't bothered to wipe away. She picked it up, ran her thumb over the shamrock, and set it back on its hook. Then she opened the junk drawer. Everyone has one, the place where rubber bands go to breed, where old keys wait for locks that no longer exist, where batteries roll around like loose change in a pocket. Eleanor's junk drawer was no exception. It lived under the counter to the left of the sink, the one with the slightly warped front panel that Daniel had never quite fixed because it still opens, doesn't it? She pulled it out all the way, the contents shifting with a soft clatter. Reading glasses, the cheap drugstore ones she kept buying and losing, a tangle of twist ties from bread bags, a handful of mismatched buttons, 3 pens that probably didn't write anymore, a small flashlight with no batteries, and buried at the back like an afterthought, an old black Nokia phone. She recognized it instantly. Daniel's backup, the one he carried in the glove compartment of the truck for emergencies, the one he swore by because if the fancy one dies, this brick will still make a call. He'd bought it in 2004 or 2005, back when flip phones were still king and everyone laughed at the idea of carrying a computer in your pocket. She remembered teasing him about it. "You look like you're talking on a walkie-talkie from the Vietnam War." And he'd grinned and said, "Better than talking to no one when the battery quits." After the accident, she'd found it in a plastic bag with his other belongings from the wreck: wallet, watch, keys, the phone. She'd charged it once, checked for messages, there were none, then dropped it into the junk drawer and closed the lid on that part of the day. Grief has a way of making objects radioactive. You don't touch them again until you're ready, and sometimes you're never ready. Now here it was again, dusty, screen scratched, battery long dead. She turned it over in her hands. The back cover was loose. She popped it off out of habit, saw the ancient battery inside, swollen slightly at the edges but not leaking. She found the charger coiled in the same drawer, white cord, chunky plug, the kind they don't make anymore. She plugged it into the outlet by the toaster. The little red light blinked once, twice, then stayed on. The phone gave a weak chirp, like a bird waking up after a long winter. Eleanor stared at it. She didn't expect anything. 5 years is a long time for a phone to hold secrets, but curiosity, the same quiet curiosity that used to make her read the last page of a novel before she started the first, kept her standing there, watching the screen slowly brighten. Nokia. No frills. The time and date appeared after a minute. It reset itself to factory settings, of course. 12 o'clock, January 1st, 2000. She pressed the menu button, navigated with the worn arrow keys to the voicemail icon. One unheard message. The timestamp, October 14th, 2019, 7:42 a.m. The morning he died. Her breath caught. She hadn't known he'd called that day. She'd been asleep. He always left before dawn when he had an early appointment, and he hadn't woken her. She pressed play, holding the phone to her ear like it might break if she gripped it too hard. His voice came through the tiny speaker, softer than the Sunday voicemail, almost conspiratorial, like he was telling her something he didn't want the world to hear. "Elle, honey, I know you're still sleeping, but I had to call. Listen, I've been working on something for you. A surprise. Been building it out in the shed for months now. Didn't want to ruin it by telling you too soon, but, well, you know me, can't keep my mouth shut forever. If anything happens, God forbid, if something happens before I show you, check the old oak tree in the backyard, the one we planted when Jack came home from the hospital. There's a clue there. I love you more than words can carry, Elle, more than the ocean out there. I'll see you tonight. Save me some of that terrible coffee you make." A small laugh at the end, his laugh, the one that started low and rolled up like thunder over the hills. Then silence. The message ended. Eleanor stood frozen, phone still pressed to her ear long after the automated voice asked if she wanted to delete or save it. Her knees felt liquid. She reached for the counter, steadied herself. The room tilted slightly, then righted itself. He'd been building something. Daniel Whitmore, who once spent 3 hours trying to hang a picture straight and finally gave up and called it modern art, had been secretly building something in the shed for months, for her. And the voicemail, the way he'd said, if anything happens, like he knew, like some part of him sensed the curve in the road, the slick pavement, the moment coming. She pressed replay, listened again. and again. Each time the words carved a little deeper. By the fourth listen, tears were running freely down her cheeks, dripping onto the counter. She didn't wipe them away. "Daniel, what in God's name were you up to?" she whispered. The house didn't answer, just the tick of the clock, the distant foghorn, and the soft hum of the phone charger. She looked at the back door that led to the yard. The shed was out there, small, weathered, padlocked with the same rusty lock they'd used since the 80s. She hadn't been inside since the week after the funeral, when she'd gone in to get his toolbox for the neighbor who needed to borrow a saw. She'd cried the whole time and left without taking anything. Now she had to go back. But not yet. First, she needed to sit down. First, she needed to breathe. She carried the Nokia to the armchair by the window, sat heavily, and played the message one more time. "Hey, Elle, I know you're still sleeping." She closed her eyes and let his voice wrap around her like an old quilt. The surprise was still out there, somewhere, waiting. Eleanor didn't go straight to the shed. She couldn't, not yet. Instead, she sat in the armchair for nearly an hour after the second voicemail ended, the Nokia resting in her lap like a fragile bird. She played Daniel's words again and again, 5 times, 6, until the battery warning beeped and the screen dimmed. Each listen carved the message deeper into her chest, the soft urgency in his voice, the little laugh at terrible coffee, the way he said, "if anything happens," like it was just a figure of speech, not a premonition. She kept coming back to that phrase, "if anything happens." Had he felt something that morning? A tightness in his chest? A strange flutter? The doctor said the heart attack was massive and sudden, probably no warning, but Eleanor had read enough medical pamphlets in the years since to know that sometimes the body whispers before it shouts. Maybe he'd sensed it. Maybe that was why he called, not just to confess the surprise, but to make sure she knew where to look if he didn't make it home for supper. The thought made her throat close up. She pressed her palm to her sternum as if she could hold the ache in place. Outside, the fog had finally lifted enough to show patches of pale sky. The oak tree stood dark against it, branches moving slowly in the breeze off the water. She watched it from the window, half expecting it to wave at her, to beckon like something out of one of those old fairy tales she used to read to her third-grade classes. She stood up, slowly, always slowly these days, and walked to the back door. The brass knob was cool under her fingers. She hesitated, then turned it and stepped onto the small wooden deck Daniel had rebuilt after a winter storm in '92 took out the old one. The boards creaked under her slippers. Salt air hit her face, sharp and clean. The backyard wasn't large, just a patch of grass that never quite greened all the way, a narrow flower bed along the fence, the shed in the far corner, and the oak tree rising like a quiet guardian in the middle. She'd mowed the lawn herself until 2 summers ago, when Jack had hired a local kid to do it after she twisted her ankle trying to start the old push mower. Now the grass was longer than she liked, speckled with dandelions and clover. She crossed the yard without hurry. Her slippers got damp from the morning dew that still clung to everything. At the base of the oak, she stopped. The trunk was thick, bark rough and furrowed. She placed her palm against it, feeling the faint warmth the sun had already started to draw out of the wood. This tree had been here for every major moment of their life together. Jack's first steps, he'd toddled straight into the trunk and bonked his head. Their 25th anniversary picnic under its branches. The night Daniel carved their initials low on the trunk with his pocket knife, while she pretended not to notice. E&D, 1970. The carving was weathered now, edges softened by rain and time, but still legible. She traced the letters with her fingertip. Daniel had said, "Check the old oak tree." But check for what? She looked around the base. The ground was uneven, roots pushing up in places like old knuckles. She knelt, carefully easing down onto one knee then the other, and brushed away a layer of fallen leaves and acorns. Nothing unusual, just dirt, a few earthworms curling away from the light, the faint smell of damp soil and pine. She dug a little with her fingers, scooping out a shallow hole near the trunk. Nothing. She tried another spot, closer to the carved initials. Still nothing. Frustration rose in her chest, hot and unfamiliar. She sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on her slacks. "What am I missing, Daniel?" she said aloud. Her voice sounded thin in the open air. A gull answered from somewhere overhead, indifferent. She stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. Maybe it wasn't literal. Daniel loved puzzles. He used to leave her little riddles on Post-it notes around the house, where the sun sets but never rises, the west-facing windowsill where he'd hide a chocolate bar. Maybe the clue was hidden in plain sight. She circled the tree slowly, eyes scanning the bark, the branches, the ground. Nothing caught her eye. No loose bark, no hollow, no marker. Her gaze drifted to the shed. The small building sat 20 feet away, gray cedar siding bleached almost white by years of salt and sun. The padlock hung open, had since the funeral when she'd forgotten to click it shut again. The door was slightly ajar, swaying an inch or two in the breeze. She hadn't been inside since that day, couldn't bear it. The shed had been Daniel's domain, his workbench, his tools, the smell of sawdust and motor oil, and the pipe tobacco he'd given up in '85 but never quite scrubbed from the walls. Going in felt like stepping into his skin. But if he'd been building something for months, the shed was the only place it could have happened. She walked over, each step heavier than the last. The door creaked when she pushed it wider. A shaft of sunlight cut through the gloom, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny moths. The air inside was cool and still, thick with the scent of old wood and metal. His workbench stretched along the back wall, cluttered as always. Hammers, screwdrivers, a handsaw, jars of nails and screws sorted by size. He'd always been particular about that. A half-empty can of Danish oil sat next to a rag stiff with dried stain. On the bench lay a rolled-up piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, held down by a brick. She unrolled it carefully. Blueprints, hand-drawn in Daniel's neat, blocky printing. Not a professional architect's work, but clear enough. Measurements, angles, notes in the margins. It looked like a bench? No, wider, a low platform with railings, a swing, a reading nook, something with a slanted roof and benches on 3 sides. There were arrows pointing to joints, labels like mortise and tin, and cedar for weather resistance. At the bottom, in red pencil, for L, Ocean View, finish by her 75th. Her 75th birthday had been 3 years ago. He hadn't finished it. She pressed the blueprint to her chest, eyes stinging. He'd been planning a gift for a birthday that came and went without him, a quiet place to sit and read, to watch the waves the way she loved to do, something he could build with his own hands, something permanent. She looked around the shed again. No half-built structure in sight, no gazebo frame, no swing set pieces, just the usual clutter. Maybe he'd taken it apart. Maybe he'd hidden it somewhere else. Or maybe he never got that far. She folded the blueprint and tucked it under her arm. Then she noticed something else. A small wooden box on the bottom shelf, half hidden behind a stack of paint cans. She pulled it out. Inside, a brass key, not the house key, not the shed key, smaller, engraved on one side with a tiny oak leaf. Her fingers closed around it. She didn't know what it opened, but she knew it was part of the puzzle. Back inside the house, she set the blueprint and the key on the kitchen table. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She picked up the landline, the old rotary one Daniel had refused to replace, and dialed a Chicago number she still knew by heart. It rang 4 times, then voicemail. This is Jack Whitmore. Leave a message after the tone." She waited for the beep. "Jack, it's Mom." Her voice cracked on the first word. She cleared her throat. "I found something from your dad, a voicemail I never heard, and he was building something for me, left clues. I don't know what to do with it alone. If you could call me back, please." She hung up before she could say more. Then she sat at the table, staring at the key and the blueprint, listening to the house settle around her. The ocean whispered beyond the windows. Somewhere, Daniel was still trying to surprise her, and she was finally ready to look. The afternoon slipped away like sand through fingers. Eleanor stayed at the kitchen table long after the phone call to Jack, the Nokia now plugged in again beside the blueprint and the small brass key with the oak leaf. She didn't touch them much, just stared, as if looking long enough might make the pieces explain themselves. The house was quiet, except for the occasional groan of settling beams and the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Daniel's parents that had never once run fast or slow. She tried to remember the last time she'd spoken to Jack face to face. 3 years ago, maybe 4. He'd flown in for her 75th birthday because she'd guilted him into it over the phone. Your father would have wanted the family together, and he'd come, stiff in a suit that smelled like airplane and city rain. They'd eaten takeout Chinese from the place on Alvarado Street because she hadn't felt like cooking. Conversation stayed polite. His job, still climbing the ladder at that marketing firm. The weather in Chicago, cold, always cold. Her health, fine, just fine. No mention of Sarah, his ex-wife, or the divorce papers that had arrived 2 years earlier like a registered letter from a stranger. No mention of why he hadn't come home since. When he left, he'd hugged her at the airport curb, quick, one-armed, and said, "Take care, Mom." She'd watched his rental car disappear into traffic and felt something crack inside her, small but permanent. Now here she was, trying to summon him back with a voicemail and a promise of his father's unfinished business. She stood up, knees protesting, and walked to the living room. The bay window framed the same view it always had: ocean, rocks, sky. She didn't sit. Instead, she moved to the bookshelf against the far wall, the one Daniel had built himself in the summer of '82, when Jack was 12 and still believed his dad could fix anything. The shelves held the usual suspects, her worn copies of Austen and Bronte, his history books, mostly Civil War and California Gold Rush, a few photo albums she hadn't opened in years. She pulled one down at random, the green leather one labeled 1970 to 1980 in her neat handwriting. She carried it to the couch and sat. The first photo was black and white, faded at the edges, her and Daniel on their honeymoon in Santa Cruz, arms around each other on the boardwalk, the giant Dipper roller coaster rising behind them like a wooden skeleton. She was 23, hair in a high ponytail, laughing so hard her eyes were squeezed shut. He was looking at her like she was the only thing worth seeing in the whole world. She turned the page. Jack, as a newborn, swaddled in the hospital blanket, tiny fist curled near his mouth. Daniel holding him for the first time, eyes wide with something between terror and awe. Caption in her handwriting, "Our Miracle. October 14th, 1970. October 14th, the same date as the voicemail. She had noticed that before. She kept turning pages. Jack at 5, gap-toothed grin, holding a fish he'd caught off the municipal wharf, Daniel beaming behind him, hand on the boy's shoulder. Jack at 10 in Little League uniform, Daniel kneeling to tie his cleats. Jack at 16, lanky and sullen, refusing to smile for the camera at his junior prom. The photos thinned out after that. High school graduation, college move-in day at San Francisco State, then nothing until Jack's wedding to Sarah in a small chapel in Oakland. Eleanor in a lavender dress she'd never worn again, Daniel in his best suit, both of them trying to look happy while something unspoken hung in the air. The last photo in the album was Christmas 2014, the three of them on this very couch, fake smiles, paper hats from the party crackers, Daniel's arm around her shoulders, Jack on the other side looking at his phone. 2 years later, Daniel was gone. 3 years after that, Jack stopped coming home. She closed the album gently, set it on the coffee table. Memories weren't kind today. They came too sharp, too bright, like sunlight on water that hurts to look at. She went back to the kitchen, made fresh coffee, not because she wanted it, but because movement felt better than stillness. While it brewed, she opened the junk drawer again just to see if anything else had been hiding there all these years. Nothing new, just the same clutter. But her eyes caught on something she'd overlooked earlier, a small yellow Post-it note stuck to the inside of the drawer lid, half peeled, ink faded but still legible in Daniel's block printing. For when the coffee runs out. Love, D. Underneath, he'd drawn a tiny coffee cup with steam rising. She peeled it off carefully, fingers trembling, and pressed it to the refrigerator door with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse. It belonged there, out in the open. The phone rang. She startled, nearly dropping her mug. The landline. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps, faster than she'd moved in months, and picked up the receiver. Hello? A pause. Then his voice, deeper than she remembered, rough around the edges from too many late nights in city air. Mom, it's Jack. She sank into the nearest chair, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Jack! Another pause. She could hear traffic in the background, horns, the low rumble of a train or an L car. I got your message. The voicemail from Dad? You're sure it's him? I played it 6 times. It's him. A long breath on his end. Jesus. She waited. He said, I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. Work's been... Anyway, what's this about building something? He said he'd been working on a surprise in the shed for months, left a clue at the oak tree. I looked, nothing obvious, found some blueprints in the shed though. Looks like he was making me a reading nook or a bench with a view. And there's a key, small, with an oak leaf on it. Jack let out a soft, surprised laugh, the same laugh Daniel used to make when something caught him off guard. Dad building something? The man who once hung a shelf upside down on purpose because he said it was abstract? She smiled despite herself. I know. Silence stretched again, but it wasn't as heavy this time. He said, I can come out. Next weekend. I've got some vacation days saved up. If you want me to. Her throat tightened. I'd like that. Okay, I'll book a flight. Text you the details. Jack? Yeah? Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I might be cranky from jet lag. She laughed, a small, surprised sound. I'll make coffee, the terrible kind. He chuckled. Save me some. The line went quiet, but neither of them hung up right away. When they finally did, Eleanor sat there holding the dead receiver for a long minute. Then she stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the oak tree. The sun was breaking through now, low and golden, turning the leaves to copper. She felt something shift inside her. Not hope exactly, not yet, but possibility, like the first crack in ice after a long winter. She turned back to the table, picked up the brass key, and slooped it into her cardigan pocket. Whatever it opened, she'd find it, with Jack's help. For the first time in 5 years, the house didn't feel quite so empty. The week before Jack arrived felt like the longest one Eleanor had lived through since the funeral. She spent the days in a strange, restless rhythm. Mornings at the kitchen table with the blueprint spread out like a map. Afternoons wandering the backyard staring at the oak tree as if it might finally give up its secret. Evenings sitting by the window with a Nokia in her lap, playing both voicemails until the words lost their edges and became something closer to music than speech. She cleaned more than she had in years. Not deep cleaning, just the small, compulsive kind that made her feel useful. She wiped down the baseboards, dusted the tops of picture frames, scrubbed the kitchen sink until the stainless steel gleamed like new. She even went through the linen closet, folding towels she hadn't used since Daniel was alive, stacking them in neat rows as if order could somehow pull the past forward. She told no one in town what she was doing. Monterey was the kind of place where news traveled on coffee steam and grocery store lines. If Mrs. Delgado at the post office or old Mr. Hargrove next door caught wind that Eleanor Whittemore had found some kind of message from her late husband, they'd be at her door with casseroles and concerned eyes before sunset. She wasn't ready for sympathy, not yet. This felt private. Fragile, like a candle flame she was afraid to breathe near. Friday morning she woke before dawn, the sky still navy outside the bedroom window. She showered, dressed in her good slacks and the cream sweater with the pearl buttons Daniel had given her for their 40th anniversary, and drove to the Monterey Regional Airport in her old Honda Civic, the same car she'd driven since Jack was in high school. The airport was small, quiet, the kind of place where people still waved at strangers. She parked in short term, bought a cup of weak coffee from the kiosk, and sat near the arrival gate watching the digital board flip numbers. His flight was on time. When the passengers began trickling out, she stood up, smoothing her sweater, suddenly aware of how thin her arms looked, how the skin on her hands had gone papery. She scanned the faces, business travelers in wrinkled suits, families with strollers, a young couple laughing too loud, and then she saw him. Jack. He looked older than she remembered, 55, but the years had carved deeper lines around his eyes and mouth. His hair was more salt than pepper now, cut short and neat, the way corporate men wore it. He wore a navy blazer over a gray polo, carry-on slung over one shoulder, rolling suitcase behind him. He looked tired, but when his eyes found hers across the small crowd, something softened in his face. He walked straight to her. Mom. She opened her arms without thinking. He stepped into them, and for a moment they just stood there, two people who had spent too long apart, holding on like they were afraid the other might vanish. He smelled like airport coffee and cologne she didn't recognize, not Old Spice, something sharper, city-made. "You're taller than I remember," she said into his shoulder. He laughed, a short surprise sound. "You're shorter." They pulled back. He looked down at her, really looked, and his expression shifted to something gentle and worried. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. Better now. They didn't say much on the drive home. Highway 1 was quiet that early, tourists still asleep, locals just starting their day. The ocean glittered on their right, silver blue under the rising sun. Jack stared out the window like he was seeing it for the first time. When they pulled into the driveway, he sat for a second before opening the door, taking in the house, the white clapboard, the blue shutters, the crooked cypress that still leaned toward the water like it was listening. "Still looks the same," he said quietly. "Some things hold on," she answered. Inside, she led him to the kitchen. The blueprint and key were still on the table where she'd left them. She'd set out his old mug, the shamrock one, next to hers. Coffee was already brewing. Jack set his bags down and picked up the mug, turning it over in his hands. "God, I remember this. Dad used to drink out of it every morning." "He did." Jack set it down carefully. Then he saw the blueprint. He unrolled it slowly, eyes scanning the lines, the notes, the red pencil handwriting at the bottom. For L, Ocean View, finish by her 75th. His throat worked. He didn't speak for a long minute. "He never said anything," Jack said finally, "never even hinted." He liked surprises. Jack traced the drawing with one finger. A reading nook with benches and a little roof, cedar so it wouldn't rot. He really planned this. Eleanor poured coffee into both mugs. He did. They sat across from each other at the table, the same table where they'd eaten thousands of meals, where arguments had flared and apologies had been mumbled, where report cards had been signed and birthday cakes had been cut. Jack took a sip, winced at the strength. Still terrible. She smiled. Some things don't change. He looked at her then, really looked, and the years between them seemed to shrink a little. "I'm sorry I stayed away." His words came out rough, like they'd been stuck for a long time. "After Sarah, after the divorce, I didn't know how to come back. Felt like I'd failed you, failed him." Eleanor reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. His skin was warm, calloused in places from whatever gym he went to in Chicago. "We're family," she said simply, "mess and all." He looked down at their joined hands. Dad would have hated this, the distance. He did. They sat in silence after that, drinking coffee that was too strong, listening to the house breathe around them. Eventually, Jack stood. "Show me the shed." She led him out back. The morning sun was higher now, warming the grass. The oak tree cast a long shadow across the yard. Jack walked straight to the tree first, placed his palm against the bark the way she had, traced the old initials with his thumb. E&D, 1970, he read aloud. "Same year I showed up." "Best year of our lives," she said. He smiled, small, sad. Then he turned to the shed. Inside, everything was as she'd left it. The workbench, the tools, the dust. Jack moved through it slowly, like he was walking through a museum of his childhood. He picked up a hammer, set it down, touched the Danish oil can, ran his fingers along the edge of the blueprint she'd left on the bench. "He really did this," Jack said, "all alone." He wanted it to be perfect. Jack opened drawers, looked under shelves, found nothing new. Then he crouched and peered under the workbench. "There's something taped here." He pulled out a small manila envelope, yellowed, sealed with tape gone brittle. On the front, in Daniel's handwriting, "For when you find this, J and E." Jack handed it to her. Her hand shook as she opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper folded once. She read it aloud, voice trembling. "Elle and Jack, if you're reading this together, then maybe I did something right. The surprise isn't just the nuke, it's the time we take to finish it, or maybe to start over. Life's too short for unfinished business. Forgive each other. Forgive me for leaving too soon. I love you both more than the ocean loves the shore. Always. Dad/Daniel." Tears blurred the words. Jack's shoulders shook silently. Eleanor folded the note, pressed it to her chest. Jack stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of her son, the boy who used to run barefoot through this yard, the man who'd come home. They stood like that in the dim shed, dust motes floating around them like tiny stars. Outside, the ocean kept its steady rhythm, and for the first time in years, the house felt full. The note from the shed changed everything. Eleanor and Jack carried it back inside like it was made of glass. They sat at the kitchen table again, the paper lying flat between them, Daniel's handwriting steady and familiar even after all this time. Neither of them spoke for a long while. They just read it over and over, tracing the words with their eyes, letting the meaning settle. "Forgive each other. Forgive me for leaving too soon." Jack finally broke the silence. "He knew we were drifting, even back then." Eleanor nodded slowly. "He always saw more than we thought he did." They didn't rush to the next step. Instead, they talked, really talked, for the first time in decades, about the divorce, about the nights Jack spent alone in his Chicago apartment staring at the ceiling, wondering why he couldn't just pick up the phone, about the mornings Eleanor woke up reaching for Daniel's side of the bed only to remember it was cold and empty, about pride, the quiet, stubborn kind that builds walls one brick at a time until you can't see over them anymore. "I thought if I stayed away," Jack said, voice low, "I wouldn't have to face how much I disappointed him or you." You never disappointed him. He was proud of you. Every promotion, every move. He kept the articles you sent in a folder in his desk, clippings from the Tribune when you got that award. He showed them to anyone who'd listen. Jack looked surprised. He never told me that. He wasn't good at saying the big things out loud. Neither am I. We both got that from our parents. Keep it inside, don't make a fuss. But he felt it, deeply. Jack rubbed his face with both hands. I should have come home more, should have called, should have, I don't know, been better. We all should have, she said gently, but we're here now. That's what matters. They decided to keep searching, methodically, no more random digging. They made a list on a yellow legal pad Eleanor found in the hall drawer. 1. Recheck the oak tree with better tools, shovel, flashlight. 2. Search the shed again, every drawer, every shelf, under the floor if needed. 3. Look through the house for anything with an oak leaf or keyhole. 4. Talk to people who might know, neighbors, old friends from the school. They started with the tree. Jack grabbed the old shovel from the garage, still sharp, still oiled the way Daniel always kept it, and they went out together. The afternoon sun was warm now, the kind of California light that makes everything look softer, more forgiving. They circled the trunk again, this time more carefully. Jack knelt and scraped away moss and dirt from the roots. Eleanor held the flashlight even though it wasn't dark yet. Nothing. No hollow, no buried box, no hidden compartment carved into the bark. Jack stood up, wiping sweat from his forehead. Maybe it's not physical. Maybe the clue is just us, being here, together. Eleanor looked at him. Maybe, but your father was practical. If he said check the tree, there's something here. They moved to the shed. Jack took the lead this time, methodical, like his father had been. He cleared the workbench completely, tools in boxes, paint cans on the floor, then swept every inch with a broom. Under the bench, behind the shelves, in the rafters, he found old receipts, one for cedar planks dated 6 months before the accident, a half-finished birdhouse Jack had started in middle school, a rusted coffee can full of bent nails. Then, in the far corner, under a tarp stiff with age, he found a small wooden crate, about the size of a shoebox, nailed shut. Jack pried the lid off with a crowbar. Inside, more sketches, variations on the reading nook, different angles, different railings, and a folded letter on top. Eleanor took it with shaking hands. It was addressed to her, in Daniel's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before he died. L. If you're reading this, I didn't finish in time. I'm sorry. The nook was supposed to be your birthday gift, your quiet place to read and watch the waves, the way you always said you wanted. But the real gift was supposed to be time. Time for us. Time for you and Jack to remember your family. I know things have been hard. I know I didn't always say the right thing, but I want you to promise me something. Don't let pride win. Talk to him. Really talk. He needs you more than he'll admit. The key opens the old sea chest in the attic. There's more there. Love you forever, Daniel. She handed the letter to Jack. He read it silently, eyes glistening. The sea chest, he said. I forgot about that thing. They went inside, climbed the narrow attic stairs, dusty, creaking, smelling of old paper and cedar. The sea chest sat against the far wall under the eaves, dark wood, brass fittings, the one Daniel had brought back from a trip to Mendocino years ago. Eleanor had always thought it was just for storage, blankets, old linens, Christmas decorations. The small brass key with the oak leaf fit perfectly. Inside the chest, more photo albums she'd never seen, letters tied with string, and a small velvet box. Jack lifted the box first. Inside, a simple gold locket. He opened it, 2 tiny photos, one of Eleanor and Daniel on their wedding day, one of baby Jack. Underneath the locket, wrapped in tissue paper, another note. L. If I'm gone, give this to Jack when the time is right. Tell him I'm proud. Tell him to come home. The nook isn't the surprise. You two are. Love always, D. Jack closed the locket carefully, set it down. Then he pulled Eleanor into a hug, tight, wordless. They stayed like that in the dim attic light, dust floating around them, the ocean murmuring far below. Later that evening, as the sun dipped toward the horizon and painted the living room gold, the doorbell rang. It was Mr. Hargrove from next door, 82, retired Navy, still sharp as a tack. He held a small paper bag. "Heard you had company," he said, nodding at Jack. "Figured I'd bring over some of the wife's shortbread, and I remembered something." They invited him in. Over coffee at the table, he told them. "Daniel came by my place about a month before, asked if I still had that old wall safe from the war years, said he needed somewhere secure but sentimental to hide something. I told him no, the safe was long gone, but he laughed and said, 'Then I'll make my own.' Never thought much of it till now." A wall safe. They looked at each other. The living room wall, the one with the bay window, the one Daniel had patched himself after a leak in '98. Jack stood up. "Let's find it." They spent the next hour tapping panels, listening for hollow sounds. Near the window, one spot rang different, duller, deeper. Jack pressed gently. A small section of drywall shifted. Behind it, a shallow recess, no bigger than a bread box. Inside, a metal box, locked. The oak leaf key fit again. Inside the box, tools, hammer, chisel, screwdriver, a final set of blueprints with final measurements, and one last envelope, thick, sealed. Eleanor opened it. A single handwritten letter dated the night before he died. She read it out loud, her voice breaking on every word. "My dearest Elle, if you found this, then you followed the trail. Good. That means you're still the stubborn, curious woman I fell in love with. The surprise was never really the Nook. It was always you and Jack. I built clues because I knew, deep down, I might not get to say everything I needed to say in person. Tell our boy I love him. Tell him I never stopped being proud. Tell him life's too short for grudges. And tell him to take care of his mom. She's the best thing that ever happened to either of us. Forgive me for going first. Forgive each other for the time lost. I'll be waiting. Save me some coffee. Forever yours, Daniel." The room went very still. Jack was crying openly now. Quiet, steady tears. Eleanor folded the letter, pressed it to her heart. Then she reached for her son's hand. They sat there as the sun set, the ocean turning dark and silver outside the window. The search wasn't over, not quite, but the most important thing had already been found. The sun was low over the Pacific that evening, a fat orange disk hanging just above the horizon like it wasn't quite ready to leave. Eleanor and Jack walked down the narrow path from the house to the beach below, steps worn smooth by decades of feet, railings salt-bleached and splintery in places. Neither of them spoke at first. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel under their shoes, the distant bark of sea lions from the rocks, and the constant, patient rush of waves. They reached the sand, cool now that the day had cooled, and turned south toward the quieter stretch where the tide pools gathered. It was the same path they'd walked 1,000 times when Jack was small, Daniel carrying the bucket for starfish and anemones, Eleanor with the picnic blanket slung over her shoulder, Jack running ahead, bare feet kicking up wet sand. Back then, the walk had felt endless to him. Now it felt too short. Jack had changed into jeans and an old sweatshirt he'd found in his childhood closet, one of Daniel's, actually, navy with faded lettering from a Monterey High staff retreat in the '90s. It hung loose on him, but he didn't seem to mind. Eleanor wore her cardigan over the cream sweater, the brass key still in her pocket like a talisman. They stopped near a large driftwood log that had washed up years ago and never left, gray, smooth, curved like a giant's bench. They sat without asking each other. The log was cold through their clothes, but neither complained. Jack picked up a small, perfect sand dollar from the sand between his feet and turned it over in his fingers. "Remember when Dad told me these were mermaid coins?" he said. "Said if you broke one open, you'd find doves inside that carried wishes to heaven." Eleanor smiled faintly. "He told you that so you'd stop smashing them on the rocks." "Didn't work." They both laughed, quiet, shared, the kind of laugh that doesn't need volume to carry weight. The waves rolled in, white foam sliding up the sand, retreating with a soft hiss. Out on the water, a fishing boat chugged slowly toward the harbor, its running lights just starting to glow against the dusk. "I never told you about the last real trip Dad and I took. Big Sur. I was 15, angry at everything, school, you guys, the world. He dragged me camping anyway, said we needed fresh air and perspective. We hiked down to Partington Cove that one day, just the two of us, sat on the rocks watching the water crash in through that little tunnel. He didn't lecture me, just sat there. After a while, he said, 'Son, pride's a lonely road. Don't walk it alone.' I rolled my eyes, told him he sounded like a fortune cookie." Jack paused, staring at the sand dollar. "I didn't listen, not then, maybe not ever." Eleanor reached over and touched his arm. "He knew you heard him, somewhere deep down. Fathers always know." Jack nodded slowly. "I think about that cove a lot, especially after the divorce. I'd sit in my apartment in Chicago, looking through the window at Lake Michigan, and feel like I was still on that rocky shore, cold, alone, stubborn as hell. I kept thinking, if I'd just called him back then, if I'd come home more, maybe things would have been different." "You can't carry that," she said softly. "None of us can. Your father wouldn't want it." "I know, but knowing and feeling, they're two different things." The sun touched the water now, spreading gold across the surface like spilled honey. A pelican skimmed low, wings wide, then dove, sharp, sudden, gone. Under, it emerged a moment later, shaking water from its feathers. Eleanor drew her knees up a little, wrapped her arms around them. "Your father proposed to me near here, not this exact spot, but close. Up on the bluff by Bigsby Bridge. He got down on one knee in the dirt, held out that little ring his grandmother gave him. I said yes before he finished asking. We sat there until dark, talking about everything we were going to do. Kids, house by the ocean, teaching together, growing old. We believed it all." She looked out at the horizon. "We got most of it, not the growing old part, but the rest, we got it." Jack leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Your father was happy, Mom. I remember that. Even when things were hard, money tight, me being a brat, he was happy because he had you and me, even when I didn't deserve it." "You deserved it," she said firmly. "You were our boy, always." They sat in silence again. The light was fading fast now, the sky turning lavender and rose. Farther down the beach, a couple walked hand in hand, a golden retriever bounding ahead, ordinary life continuing. Jack spoke quietly. "I'm thinking about moving back. Not right away, but part-time maybe. Remote work's possible now. I could keep the apartment in Chicago, but spend more time here, help with the house, finish that damn reading nook with you, if you want." Eleanor turned to him. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but they didn't fall. "I'd like that very much." He reached over, squeezed her hand. His was warm, strong. Hers trembled just a little. They stayed until the sun was gone and the first stars appeared, sharp, bright, the way they always looked over the Pacific on clear nights. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of kelp and salt. As they stood to walk back up the path, Jack slipped his arm around her. She leaned into him, just enough to feel the solidness of him. The house lights glowed ahead, warm yellow through the windows, the porch light Daniel had installed himself flickering slightly in the breeze. They climbed the steps slowly. Inside, the reading nook blueprints still waited on the table. So did Daniel's last letter. And so did the promise they'd both made, silently, without words, to stop walking the lonely road alone. The ocean kept its rhythm behind them, steady as a heartbeat. And for the first time in years, Eleanor didn't feel quite so small against it. Word travels fast in a small coastal town like Monterey, especially when it involves someone everyone knew and loved. By Monday morning, Jack's second full day back, the phone started ringing. First, it was Mrs. Lopez from the old faculty lounge at Monterey High, now retired but still sharp as ever at 81. She'd heard from Mr. Hargrove, who told his wife, who told the woman at the dry cleaners, who told the barista at the coffee shop on Alvarado Street, that Jack was home and that Eleanor had found something from Daniel. Mrs. Lopez didn't ask outright. She just said she was in the neighborhood and wondered if they'd like some fresh tamales from her daughter's place in Seaside. Eleanor invited her over. By noon, the kitchen table held a foil pan of pork tamales, a pitcher of hibiscus tea, and 3 people who hadn't sat together in years. Mrs. Lopez, Rosa to her friends, wore her usual bright floral blouse and gold hoop earrings, hair pulled back in a neat bun. She hugged Eleanor like she was greeting family, then turned to Jack with tears already shining. "Look at you," she said, cupping his face in both hands. "All grown up and still got your daddy's eyes." Jack smiled, a little embarrassed. "Good to see you too, Mrs. Lopez." They sat. Rosa didn't waste time. "I remember the day Daniel bought those flowers," she began, unwrapping a tamale with practiced fingers. "About 6 months before he left us. Came into the shop on a Tuesday morning, early before the tourists, asked for roses, not red, pink. Said they were for a special spot that needed remembering. Paid cash, like always. I teased him. 'Daniel, you finally figuring out romance after all these years?' He just smiled that quiet smile of his and said, 'Rosa, some things you do quiet so they mean more.' Then he left. Never told me where they went." Eleanor felt a small jolt. Pink roses. Daniel had planted a row of pink hybrid teas along the back fence years ago, her favorite. She'd assumed he'd done it for their anniversary, but maybe there was more. "Did he say anything else?" Jack asked. Rosa thought for a moment. "He mentioned the oak tree, said something about roots running deep and secrets that need light. I thought he was being poetic. You know how he got when he talked about history. Everything was a metaphor." They thanked her. She left with another hug and a promise to bring more food whenever you need feeding. The next visitor came unannounced, Mr. Patel from the hardware store on Del Monte Avenue. He'd owned the place since the 80s, knew every nail and screw Daniel had ever bought. He knocked around 3 o'clock, cap in hand, looking a little sheepish. "Eleanor, Jack," he said, stepping inside when invited. "I heard from Hargrove about the project. Daniel was in my store a lot that last year, bought cedar planks, good ones, clear grain, no knots, said it was for something lasting. Also got brass hinges, weatherproof sealant, and a small lock set, the kind you put on a chest or a hidden panel. I asked what he was building. He winked and said, 'A place for memories, Raj. Can't have memories getting wet.'" Jack wrote it down on the legal pad they'd started using. Cedar, hinges, lock set. Mr. Patel stayed for coffee. Before he left, he added quietly, he paid for everything in cash, small amounts, spread out over months, like he didn't want it on the credit card statement. Thought you might want to know. Eleanor thanked him. When the door closed, she looked at Jack. He was hiding it from me, not because he didn't trust me, because he wanted it to be perfect, a gift. Jack nodded. He always did that. Remember the dollhouse he built for my 8th birthday? Worked on it in the garage for weeks, told you he was fixing the lawnmower. They laughed softly, sad laughter, but warm. That evening, after the visitors had gone, they went back to the garden. The pink roses along the fence were still blooming even in late fall, stubborn little things. Eleanor knelt carefully, brushing mulch aside with her hands. Under the largest bush, half buried in soil, was a small brass plaque, no bigger than a playing card, engraved in simple block letters. For Elle's eyes only. Look where the sun sets but never rises. Jack read it aloud. The west-facing windowsill, he said immediately, like those old post-it riddles he used to leave you. They hurried inside. In the living room, the bay window faced west, perfect view of the ocean at sunset. The sill was wide, deep enough for plants or books. Eleanor ran her fingers along the underside. There, a small notch, barely noticeable. She pressed it. A narrow panel slid open, barely 2 inches wide, hidden in the woodwork Daniel had refinished himself years ago. Inside, a small tin box, rusted at the edges but intact. Jack lifted it out gently. They sat on the couch together and opened it. Inside, ticket stubs from their honeymoon, Santa Cruz Bard Walk, 1967, a pressed flower, one of the pink roses, a faded Polaroid of the 3 of them at Carmel Beach when Jack was 3, and one last folded note. Daniel's handwriting. Elle, if you found this, you've remembered how we used to play. The real surprise isn't wood or nails, it's the life we built, the memories, the love that outlasts everything. Give Jack the locket from the sea chest. Tell him his dad never stopped loving him. Tell him to stop running. And you, my Elle, forgive yourself for the years of quiet. You did the best you could. You always did. I'm proud of both of you. Save me some coffee. I'll be home soon. Forever. Daniel. Eleanor's hand shook so badly Jack had to steady the box. He took the note, read it again, then folded it carefully and placed it back inside. They sat in silence as the last light of day drained from the room. Outside, the ocean whispered. Inside, the house held its breath. Then Jack reached over and took his mother's hand. "We're not finished yet," he said. "No," she answered. "We're just beginning." The community's secrets had opened more doors than they'd closed, and the trail Daniel left was leading them exactly where he'd always wanted them to go. Home. The next morning dawned clear and sharp, the kind of Monterey morning where the sky looks freshly washed and the air carries just enough salt to remind you you're alive. Eleanor woke early, before the alarm she no longer needed, and lay in bed listening to the house settle. Jack's snoring came faintly from the guest room down the hall, a deep, steady rumble that reminded her so much of Daniel she almost smiled through the ache. She rose quietly, slipped into her robe, and padded to the kitchen. Coffee first, Folgers, 6 scoops, 2 mugs. She left Jack's on the counter, half full, steam curling like an old habit. Then she stood at the window, watching the ocean turn from slate to silver as the sun climbed. Jack appeared around 7:30, hair mussed, wearing the same sweatshirt from yesterday. He rubbed his eyes, saw the mug, and gave a small, grateful nod. "Morning," he said, voice thick with sleep. "Morning. Sleep okay?" "Like a rock. Haven't slept that deep in years." They drank coffee in companionable silence for a while. Then Jack set his mug down. "I was thinking," he said, "we've been digging through the house, the shed, the garden, found letters, clues, memories, but maybe we need to get out, clear our heads, go somewhere Dad loved." Eleanor looked at him. "Where?" "Big Sur, the coast road, stop at Bixby Bridge. Maybe the cove he took you to once, or the one he took me to. Just drive, like we used to." She felt something loosen in her chest. "We haven't done that since before you left for college." Exactly. Let's do it today. Pack a thermos, some sandwiches, no plan, just the road. She didn't argue. By 9, they were in the Civic, Eleanor driving, Jack in the passenger seat with the map app open on his phone, even though neither of them needed directions. Highway 1 south out of Monterey was quiet midweek, no tour buses yet, just locals and the occasional cyclist. The road hugged the cliffs, twisting and turning, the Pacific glittering far below like shattered glass. They didn't talk much at first, just the hum of the engine, the occasional sigh of tires on pavement, the radio low on an oldie station playing songs Daniel used to sing along to badly. At Carmel Highlands, they pulled over at a vista point. The wind was brisk, whipping Eleanor's hair across her face. She held it back with one hand and stared down at the waves crashing against the rocks. "This is where he took that picture of us," she said, "the one in the green album. You were maybe 4. You kept trying to chase the seagulls and falling on your bottom." Jack laughed. "I remember the sand in my shoes for days." They stood shoulder to shoulder, wind pushing at them like it wanted to move them along. Further south, past Point Lobos, the road narrowed. Redwoods began to appear on the inland side, tall, silent sentinels. Eleanor slowed at each curve, letting the beauty sink in. At Bixby Bridge, they stopped again. The famous concrete arch spanned the canyon like something out of a dream, elegant, impossible, built in 1932 when men still believed in things like permanence. Tourists were already gathering, phones out, but Eleanor and Jack walked past them to the overlook on the north side. "This is it," she said quietly, "right here." He got down on one knee in the dirt. The wind was blowing so hard my skirt kept flying up. I laughed the whole time he was trying to propose. Jack looked out at the bridge, the ocean roaring far below. "He told me the story once, said you were the only thing worth getting on his knees for." Eleanor's eyes filled. "He never told me he told you that." They stood there a long time. A gull circled overhead, crying once, then gliding away. Jack spoke after a while, voice rough. "I keep thinking about what he wrote. Stop running. I've been running my whole adult life. Chicago, promotions, new apartments, new girlfriends who never lasted. Running from the quiet, from the things I didn't say, from failing at marriage, from failing you." Eleanor turned to him. "You didn't fail me, Jack. You were young, you were hurting, and I pushed too hard, told you what you should do instead of asking what you needed. I was scared you'd leave and never come back, and then you did." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it." She reached up and touched his cheek, rough with stubble, warm with life. "I forgive you, and I'm sorry too, for the silence, for the pride, for letting the years slip away." They hugged there on the overlook, wind whipping around them, tourists glancing politely, then looking away. When they pulled back, both were crying a little, but it felt clean, like rain after a long drought. They drove on, past Pfeiffer Beach, past the turning for Partington Cove. Jack pointed. "That's the one, the hike down to the cove, steep trail but worth it." They parked, grabbed water bottles, and started down. The path was narrow, switchbacks cut into the cliff, flower wilds still clinging to the edges even in late fall. Eleanor moved slowly, holding the rope handrail Daniel had helped install years ago with the state park volunteers. Jack stayed close behind, ready to steady her if she slipped. At the bottom, the cove opened up. Small pocket of sand framed by sheer cliffs, a natural tunnel where the ocean surged in and out with each wave. The water was turquoise in the sun, foam white like lace. They sat on the rocks near the tunnel mouth, feet dangling above the tide. "This is where he told me about pride," Jack said. "We sat right here. He didn't preach, just talked, said history is full of men who let pride destroy them, kings, generals, ordinary fathers, said the only way to win against it is to swallow it sometimes, admit when you're wrong, ask for help." Eleanor listened, watching the water rush in and out. "I wish I'd swallowed mine sooner," she said. "I thought if I stayed strong, didn't show weakness, you'd respect me more, but all I did was build walls." Jack picked up a small, smooth stone from the sand. We both did. They threw stones into the incoming waves, gentle arcs, not hard throws. Each one disappeared with a soft plop. After a while, Jack said, "I've been thinking about what comes next. I can work remote. The firm's already half virtual. I could rent out the Chicago place, come back here for months at a time, help finish the reading nook, maybe even build something new, a bench down here or up on the bluff, something Dad would have liked." Eleanor looked at him, really looked. The lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the quiet resolve in his face. He looked like Daniel in that moment, older and sadder, but still hopeful. "I'd like that, but only if it's what you want, not out of guilt." "It's not guilt, it's coming home, finally." They stayed until the tide started creeping higher, forcing them back up the trail. The climb was harder, legs burning, breath short, but they took it slow, pausing at switchbacks to look out at the endless blue. Back at the car, Eleanor handed Jack the keys. "Your turn to drive." He took them without protest. On the way home, they stopped at Nepenthe for coffee and pie, views of the coast stretching forever, the kind of place Daniel always said made you feel small in the best way. They ate in silence mostly, watching the light change on the water. When they finally pulled into the driveway as the sun was setting, the house looked different somehow, warmer, less lonely. Jack turned off the engine. "Thank you for today," he said. Eleanor reached over and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for coming back." Inside, the blueprints waited on the table, the letters waited in their boxes, and somewhere Daniel's voice waited in the old phone, still saying, "I'll be home soon." But this time, they both believed it. The house felt different the morning after the Big Sur drive, lighter somehow, as if the salt air from the coast had slipped through the windows and swept away some of the dust that had settled in the corners over the years. Eleanor woke to the sound of Jack moving around in the kitchen, the clink of mugs, the soft gurgle of the coffee maker, the familiar scrape of a chair being pulled out. For a moment she lay still, eyes closed, letting the ordinary sounds wrap around her like a blanket she hadn't realized she'd been missing. When she came downstairs, Jack was already at the table, blueprints spread out again, a fresh pot of coffee steaming between them. He'd even toasted some bread, sourdough from the bakery on Lighthouse Avenue, buttered thick the way Daniel used to do it. "Thought we'd eat first," he said, sliding a plate toward her, "then finish what Dad started." She sat, took a bite, and felt the simple comfort of it settle in her chest. You remembered the bread. Dad's rule, never start a project on an empty stomach. They ate slowly, talking about small things, the way the fog had burned off early today, how the neighbor's dog had barked at a seal on the rocks last night, how the reading nook would look once it was built. No heavy confessions, just the quiet rebuilding of routine. After breakfast, they went back to the shed. Jack had already cleared more space the day before, tools organized on pegboard, floor swept, dust wiped from every surface. The workbench was bare now, except for the final set of blueprints they'd found in the sea chest and the metal box from the wall safe. He'd even dragged in an old shop light from the garage and strung an extension cord so they could see clearly. Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching him work. He moved with the same deliberate care Daniel had always shown, measuring twice, cutting once, pausing to think before acting. "We've got all the pieces," Jack said, tapping the blueprint. "Cedar planks in the rafters, still wrapped in plastic like he bought extras. Hinges, screws, sealant, even the little brass plaque he was going to mount on the backrest. For L from D, forever." She stepped closer, ran her fingers over the wood. The cedar smelled clean and sharp, like the forest after rain. "He must have stored it up here so I wouldn't find it." Jack nodded. "Smart. You never came in here unless you had to." They started small. First, they carried the planks outside to the backyard, laying them across sawhorses Jack set up under the oak tree. The sun was high now, warm on their backs. Jack measured and marked. Eleanor held the straight edge steady. They worked in a rhythm, quiet questions, quick answers, the soft rasp of the saw, the tap of the mallet. Around noon, they stopped for water and sandwiches. Sitting on the grass under the oak, Eleanor looked up at the branches. "Remember when we planted this? You were so small. You kept trying to help dig the hole, but your shovel was bigger than you were." Jack smiled. "Dad let me anyway, said even little hands make big differences." They finished the frame that afternoon, simple but sturdy, 4 posts sunk into concrete footings Jack mixed himself, cross beams notched and bolted, a slanted roof frame to shed rain. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, American-made, practical, built to last. As the light began to slant golden, Jack stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. "Almost there," he said. "Tomorrow we can add the benches, the railings, maybe stain it by the weekend." Eleanor nodded, but her eyes were on something else, the floor of the shed where they'd moved everything out. The boards were old pine, worn smooth by years of footsteps. One near the back wall looked slightly raised, a hairline gap where the others were tight. "Jack, look at that." He crouched, ran his fingers along the seam. "It's loose, not nailed down all the way." They pried it up together, gently, with a flat bar so as not to splinter the wood. Underneath, in the crawl space between the floor joists, lay a flat wooden panel about 2 feet square, stained to match the rest of the floor, so it blended perfectly. A small brass ring pole was set flush in one corner. He lifted it. Below, another shallow compartment lined with felt. Inside rested a single item, a slim leather-bound journal, no bigger than a paperback. On the cover, embossed in gold, "For Elle and Jack." Eleanor's breath caught. Jack lifted it carefully as if it might crumble. They sat on the shed floor, dusty, knees aching, and opened it together. The first pages were sketches, more variations on the reading nook, notes in the margins about measurements, wood grain, how the afternoon light would hit the benches. Then came the letters, handwritten, dated over the last 2 years of Daniel's life. The first one to Eleanor. "Elle, some days I sit here and just think about you, how you still read with that little frown when a sentence doesn't make sense, how you hum when you're happy. I'm building this for the days when I'm not here to see it, so you'll have a place to sit and remember we were happy. Most of the time we were. Love, D." Another, dated 6 months later. "Jack, if you ever read this, know I watched every game you played, even the ones you lost. I kept the newspaper clippings. I kept your letters home from college. I kept hoping you'd call. Pride's a heavy thing, son. Don't carry it forever. Your dad." Page after page, short notes, long reflections, apologies for things said and unsaid, pride in things accomplished, love spelled out plainly because he hadn't always said it aloud. The last entry dated 2 days before the accident. "I'm almost done. The nook's ready to assemble, but the real work was always this, leaving words behind in case time runs short. Elle, forgive our boy. He's hurting more than he shows. Jack, forgive your mom. She's stronger than she knows, but she needs you. Forgive me for not saying it enough while I could. I love you both, more than the ocean, more than history, more than anything. See you soon. D." Eleanor closed the journal slowly, tears falling freely now. Jack's shoulders shook as he leaned against her. They sat there until the light faded and the evening chill crept in. Then Jack helped her up. They carried the journal inside, placed it on the kitchen table beside the blueprints. That night, after supper, simple grilled cheese and tomato soup, they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool air. The ocean was a dark murmur beyond the cliff. The stars were out, sharp and close. Jack spoke first. "We'll finish the nook, put it right under the bay window like the blueprint said, mount his plaque on it, and we'll keep this journal on the shelf inside, open so we can read it whenever we need to." Eleanor acknowledged, "And we'll add to it, our words, our memories." Jack reached over, took her hand. "No more running, for either of us." "No more running," she echoed. The foghorn sounded once, low and distant. Somewhere out there, Daniel was smiling, and for the first time in 5 years, Eleanor believed he could hear them. Winter came softly to Monterey that year, the way it always did. No dramatic snowfalls or biting cold, just longer nights, a sharper bite in the wind off the water, and fog that lingered until mid-morning like a reluctant guest. Eleanor welcomed it. The quiet suited her now. It gave her space to breathe, to think, to feel without the constant pressure of having to do something about the ache. The reading nook took shape over the next 3 weeks. Jack stayed longer than planned. First, the weekends stretched to 10 days, then to 3 weeks. He rearranged meetings with his firm in Chicago, worked from the small desk in the guest room during mornings, then joined her in the backyard or the shed in the afternoons. They didn't rush. Daniel's blueprints guided them, but they added touches of their own. Extra bracing for stability, because Dad always overbuilt. A small shelf inside for her paperbacks, a cushioned bench seat upholstered in weather-resistant fabric the color of sea glass. When it was finished, they installed it under the bay window in the living room, exactly where the blueprints showed, facing the ocean so the afternoon light would spill across the pages of whatever book she chose. The cedar glowed warm in the sunlight, the brass plaque on the backrest catching the light. For L from D, forever. They placed the leather journal on the narrow shelf inside, open to the last page Daniel had written. Beside it, Eleanor added the locket from the sea chest. Jack slipped in a small photo he'd brought from Chicago, him and Daniel at a Giants game in San Francisco, both wearing orange and black caps, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like boys. They sat in the nook together the first evening it was complete, Eleanor on one bench, Jack on the other. The window framed the Pacific perfectly, waves rolling in slow and steady, the horizon a thin silver line under the fading sky. "It's better than I imagined," Eleanor said quietly. Jack nodded. He would have loved seeing us here. They didn't speak much after that, just sat, listening to the ocean breathe, feeling the house settle around them like it finally had permission to rest. Christmas came a month later. Jack flew back to Chicago for a few days to tie up loose ends, sublet the apartment, pack what he needed, and arrange for the rest to be shipped. When he returned on the 23rd, he brought a small artificial tree. Eleanor had sworn off real ones after the year Daniel tracked needles through the house for months, boxes of lights, and a single ornament wrapped in tissue paper. He handed it to her on Christmas Eve. She unwrapped it carefully, a small ceramic coffee mug painted white with a green shamrock, just like the one on the drain board. Inside, tucked in the bottom, was a folded note in Jack's handwriting. "Mom, for the second mug, save him some coffee every Sunday. I'll help drink it when I'm here. Love, Jack." She cried then, not the sharp, sudden tears of grief, but the slow, cleansing kind that come when something broken finally mends. They decorated the tree together that night, hanging lights and the few ornaments they still had from years past. Jack placed the new mug ornament near the top. Eleanor added the locket and a tiny wooden oak leaf she'd found in the shed. On Christmas morning, they opened gifts, simple things, a new cardigan for her, a history book about the California missions for him, a framed photo of the 3 of them from the green album. They ate cinnamon rolls from the bakery, drank coffee from the matching mugs, and sat in the nook watching the waves. No big speeches, no dramatic declarations, just quiet. Later that afternoon, they walked down to the beach. The sand was cold under their boots, the wind sharp enough to sting cheeks. They walked the same path they'd taken weeks earlier, past the driftwood log, toward the tide pools. The water was higher today, waves crashing harder against the rocks. They stopped near the spot where Daniel had proposed, close enough to see Bixby Bridge in the distance, its arch graceful against the winter sky. Jack pulled a small envelope from his coat pocket. "I wrote something," he said, "for the journal. Thought we could read it together." Eleanor nodded. He opened it, cleared his throat. "Dad, I came home, finally. Mom and I finished the nook. It's beautiful. We sit in it every evening and talk about you, about us, about the things we should have said sooner. I'm sorry it took me so long. I was scared of failing again, of facing how much I missed you, of admitting I needed help. But I'm here now, and I'm staying, part of the year here, part in Chicago until I figure out how to make it permanent. I love you. I'm proud to be your son. Thank you for the clues, for the letters, for never giving up on me. See you in the quiet moments. Jack." He folded the paper, slipped it into the envelope, then handed it to Eleanor. She took it, then pulled her own folded note from her pocket. "I wrote one too," she said. She read aloud, voice steady but soft. "Daniel, you left us the most beautiful gift, not the wood or the nails, but the path back to each other. Jack is home. We talk every day. We laugh, we cry, we remember. I forgive him. I forgive myself, and I forgive you for going first. You gave us everything we needed to keep going. I still save you coffee every Sunday. Jack drinks it with me now. I love you, always. Wait for me. L." They stood there a long time, wind whipping around them, waves crashing below. Then Jack took both envelopes, walked to the water's edge, and tucked them into a small hollow in the rocks, high enough that the tide wouldn't reach them right away, but close enough that the ocean could whisper to them. They watched the waves for a while longer. When they turned back toward the path, Jack offered his arm. Eleanor took it. They climbed the steps slowly, side by side. At the top, the house waited, lights on, smoke curling from the chimney. Jack had started a small fire earlier, the reading nook visible through the bay window like a promise kept. Inside, Eleanor paused at the doorway. The ocean rolled on outside, eternal and indifferent, but inside, something had changed. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of memory, of forgiveness, of second chances that came late, but not too late. She looked at Jack. He looked back. They smiled, small, tired, real smiles. Then they stepped inside together and closed the door against the wind. The last voicemail still waited on the old Nokia if they ever needed to hear it again, but most days now they didn't. They had new voices to listen to, their own, and the quiet, steady sound of healing waves.